undeveloped village core, or historic core to the village, that provides several opportunities for open area excavation, and that's not always the case. Often you find that the village cores are heavily built up, and you just don't have the spaces to examine them on a large scale. And going back to my original kind of review of past research, we want to counteract this keyhole glimpse situation that characterises much of past research. So you can see in this aerial view that we've got these large open spaces, and we've been systematically targeting those since 2008. So there's 2008 excavations, actually showing up nicely on Bing maps. That's 2009. We did a trial trenching exercise in that area in 2010, alongside an open area excavation just here. So that's the previous phase of a 3-year campaign. And then here we are for our first excavation in our new AHRC funded campaign in this nice open area known as Tame Field, which is used as the village green. It doesn't have official village green status, but it's owned by the parish council, and they've kindly given us permission to dig it up. Bearing in mind we do put it back at the end of every season. We don't just leave great big dirty holes for people to fall in. So that's why we've chosen Lyminge as the case study. Now, just going back and looking at past work, one of the things I think is important for you to know is that the archaeology that we're doing there is very much recovering a place that, in many senses, was forgotten archaeologically. This is not a place that people have been targeting and excavating over a long period, and we're just going back and doing more. Really, you have to go back to the 19th century, to the 1850s and 60s. When this site and the village was last targeted. And here we have a picture of the person responsible for that work. That's Canon Jenkins. He's the vicar of the parish church in Lyminge, and here you see him, a sort of a classic image here of a Victorian cleric scholar with his books, his extensive library behind him. Now, he was well aware of the historical associations of Lyminge in the Anglo-Saxon period. We do have evidence for the foundation of a monastery, of a monastic community at Lyminge, in relation to a foundress, Queen Ethelburga, who was daughter of King Ethelbert of Kent, the convert king of Kent, and widow of King Edwin of Northumbria. She's one of the key figures in Bede's ecclesiastical history. And if you believe the historical sources, she founded a monastery in Lyminge in AD 633. However, one has to take this with a pinch of salt. That information comes from a relatively late source, post-Norman conquest source, that modern historians have critiqued. So that link is very unlikely. However, back in the 1860s, Canon Jenkins here was firmly of the belief that this monastery was founded according to that particular information, and he believed that Queen Ethelburga was buried somewhere on the site of Lyminge, somewhere close by the medieval parish church. This led him to undertake a series of excavations in the churchyard over many years, actually, and he was pretty successful in that he did indeed uncover the remains of the monastic core of Lyminge, including a number of masonry buildings, one of which, this one here with this nice apsidal east end, is absolutely classic for the earliest generation of churches, of monastic or minster churches, founded in Kent in the 7th century. It fits into a broader group that we know about from other sites like St Augustine's, Canterbury and Reculver. So that's all well and good. But there are also a series of kind of foundations and remains with a western apse to the southwest of the medieval church tower. Now, in this plan here that's published in Archaeology Cantiana, the regional journal, in Jenkins' day, what he's done is conflated this into a huge basilican-style church that would look perfectly in place in 6th century Ravenna, but is totally anachronistic in 7th century Kent. So what we probably have here is indeed a sort of a focal Minster church immediately to the south of the medieval church, but associated buildings. There's other stuff happening in relation to the monastic core. We can't rely on Jenkins' plans and his level of recording. So one of the things the project's going to be doing is ground penetrating radar within the churchyard to try and retrace the original foundations. And Dave Thornley is in the audience, and he's going to be responsible for undertaking that survey for us. And I'm sure that you think that we've got a really high chance of being able to improve understanding of those buildings. But it's a complicated task because you've got burial within that area. Just this is a place of, well, it was a place of active burial in the Victorian period. So we've got a lot of disturbance there, but nevertheless, we hope to improve understanding through that GPR survey, and also going back to the extensive Jenkins archive that's held by the Society of the Antiquaries. And that's one of Alex's tasks, to go and trawl through the contemporary correspondence of Canon Jenkins at that time. And you can see here with this plaque in the south side of the church that Jenkins was very much, in a sense, I think in a very sort of positive way, he was very much, his work was about trying to reclaim the former glory of a site that had been very much forgotten about. He placed a plaque here in the south wall of the church, and also there's another plaque, so-called Queen Ethelberga's Well, that I'll talk about in a moment. So that's really the sum total of past work until our recent programme of excavation research commenced in 2007. So I want to begin next by looking at really summarising the results of all the work that we've done in the last few years. And I want to present it as a narrative that highlights the dynamic aspects of Lyminge as a monastic landscape. And I want to start that by first looking back. What was at Lyminge prior to the foundation of the monastery, and how has recent archaeological excavation contributed to our understanding of that era? Now, the first thing to say is that there's various forms of evidence that feed in to our understanding of Lyminge in the early Anglo-Saxon period, so between the 5th and 6th, 7th centuries, as a central place, a place of economic and social importance. The place name itself is pretty key here. What it tells us, without going into sort of Old English, sort of lots of details of the Old English, is it tells us that it's a district centre. And this is an archaic form of place name that tells us that Lyminge was functioning as the centre of a broader district. It's also well placed in terms of communication arteries. This map here shows the main Roman roads that existed in East Kent, and Lyminge is located pretty closely to this one here that connected the regional capital of Canterbury with a Roman shore fort down here of Portus Limanis. We've also got a number of important downland routeways. Lyminge is located in the North Downs of Kent that provided access formed important communication arteries. So it's in a pretty strategic zone. Previous work has shown that Lyminge had more than one Anglo-Saxon or early Anglo-Saxon cemetery associated with it. In the 1950s, an Anglo-Saxon inhumation cemetery was found just to the northern outskirts of the village, the result of the construction of a mushroom shed. How common that is. and about 50 or 60 burials were excavated at that period. What that showed is that you had burial taking place between fairly early on in terms of Anglo-Saxon culture, from the mid to late 5th century going on through to the end of the 6th. Clear evidence for high status individuals being buried, both male and female, certainly in the 6th century. So lots of suites of high status objects, such as those shown in the top right hand side. A subsequent phase, unpublished, of excavation on this site has recovered further evidence for cult activities that you would associate with high status burial, and I include in here horse sacrifices going on in this cemetery in the 6th century. And this is something that we associate particularly with high status individuals who are steeped in the elite culture of equestrianism in the early Anglo-Saxon period. So, just to make the point that this is only one of 2 known cemeteries. There's a much less well understood cemetery down here to the south of the village, and there's likely to be more because we don't have any 7th century burials at Lyminge. One would expect that from what we know from other Anglo-Saxon district centres. So in other words, Lyminge perhaps potentially is ringed by a multiplicity of several cemeteries, which is a characteristic of early district centres in Kent. Now, up until our excavations, what the Anglo-Saxon archaeology in Kent lacked was an understanding of the domestic settlement archaeology of one of these district centres or royal villas. Previously we had plenty of cemetery evidence, but no domestic settlement evidence, and that's where work within the core of the village has provided absolutely key information. And this is really the results of the last 2 phases of excavation in 2010 and our most recent in 2012. We're in the lowest lying regions of the village here, straddling the headwater and spring head of the River Nailbourne, which is now it's a fairly small watercourse that flows northwards towards Canterbury. So these are, as I mentioned, this is quite a low-lying area of the village that we know from 2012 is very long occupied. We've got occupation here dating right back to the Mesolithic. There's a major Mesolithic site fringing that watercourse. And in association with this occupation, we found absolutely classic, features that one finds in early Anglo-Saxon settlements. Sunken featured buildings. I'm not going to talk about, give you the deep. Many of you will know what sunken featured building means. These are absolutely, what one would expect from 5th to 7th century occupation. Found in association with post-built halls. From the earlier phases at least, which are fairly modest in scale, about 4 to 5 metres wide, 10 to 12 metres long. So that's fairly standard for occupation of this period. What's more unusual, however, just to sort of make the point that what we're probably looking at is a fairly diffuse sprawl of early Anglo-Saxon occupation of this kind of scale. Although we've only sampled it in 2 places, I think one can make that assumption from what we know of other settlements of this period. What's unusual is the richness of the cultural deposits that are being dumped into abandoned sunken featured buildings, and this is fairly standard practice on Anglo-Saxon settlements. They abandon these structures and then anthropomorphic material gets dumped back in. Incredibly rich. Very useful for dating purposes. We can establish the terminus post-gloss of the abandonment of these buildings fairly robustly from the types of artefacts that we get in the sunken featured buildings, and that's what allows us to date this period of occupation. So we've got about maybe 150 years or so of occupation from the late 5th through into the early to mid 6th centuries, down here in the lowest part of the village. Interestingly, there's various waste streams being incorporated into the sunken featured buildings. So we've got like tertiary rubbish, Wendy will probably, you know, this is Wendy's field here. We're talking schiffer and all that sort of stuff. So you've got tertiary deposits going in, midden material, it's been around, hanging around on the surface for ages, getting incorporated, but also, importantly, secondary material, so like almost complete objects being redeposited into these sunken featured buildings as well. But I think one of the clear things coming out of these deposits is the high status signatures, both in the objects and the animal bone. Lots of vessel glass, otherwise a type of object that one only finds in high status graves from this period. And we'll talk about the formal assemblages a bit later. We're also getting the deliberate deposition of whole objects in some of these sunken featured buildings. And I don't have time to talk about it really today, but one of our star finds from 2010 was this rather spectacular plough coulter. The only example known from early Anglo-Saxon England. The position is firmly dated to prior to the